This video was made possible by Blitz Esports. Blitz Esports is a free and easy to use desktop app to help provide all of the stats and information you might need for League of Legends. The app is automatic and integrates smooth like butter into your gameplay. It's much easier than having to look up the information manually, and you'll receive much more detailed information with Blitz Esports as well, which does include suggested builds and runes, champion stats, and scouting notes for both your opponents and teammates. And at the end of the game, you can see a detailed post-game analysis with feedback badges that sums up your performance each game for an easy self-review. Personally, I've been using the app a lot and it's proven to be a really awesome tool for me, so I'm super happy to be promoting them. The info with Blitz is entirely comprehensive, so it fills the role of multiple other websites and tools combined, as well as a few extra things too, in a way that's really convenient and easy. It's completely free and doesn't have any ads either, so you don't have to take it from me, you can just try it out for yourself and see if you like it or not. Check it out at the link in the description, and thanks again to Blitz Esports for sponsoring our channel. What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. We're back again with another episode of my personal favorite series on this channel, which is Scrapped Abilities. It's actually been about 4 months since our last one, so hopefully there's some new viewers that maybe haven't seen one of these videos before. And of course we're covering different abilities than we have in previous videos to give it some variety. When Riot moves into the ideation phase of champion development, they of course spend tons of time trying out different mechanics and themes to figure out the direction to take a new character, and the abilities that would represent their personality and narrative in-game. The same issue is also true for reworks, where they spend a lot of time fine-tuning new abilities to fix existing issues and make them line up better with Riot's modern standards. And we of course spend a ton of time researching champion development and looking for official Riot commentary on some of the crazy abilities that were tested out that didn't make it into League of Legends. It always gives us some pretty cool insight into the dev's thought process during gameplay development, and every now and then we find out about some really crazy and interesting new mechanics that could also possibly turn up on future champions. So let's jump right into today's list, and as always, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like on it or let us know in the comment section below, and be sure to subscribe for some more videos. I promise I wouldn't say that if it didn't just double the number of interactions and likes we got in a video. So thanks everyone for supporting our content. So our first scrapped ability today was shared on Twitter by Riot Feral Pony, and it features a little animal companion for Azir that the designers affectionately referred to as Lil Buddy. It took the form of either a sand shark or a sand worm, and it would pop out of Azir's sand zones to maul people for a little bit of extra damage. This ability comes from a time where Azir would leave sand on the ground behind from his abilities, kind of similar in a way to Talia's worked ground mechanic, but in a way that was much more involved with his entire kit as a whole. It was actually kind of comparable almost to Creep from Zerg in StarCraft if you've ever played that game. Riot must have later decided to go down the Emperor route with a focus on sand soldiers, resulting in the worm being removed. Fortunately, it's a pretty easy mechanic to line up with a different theme, so maybe we'll see something similar in the future on a different champion. Next up, we've got some abilities from early on in Rek'Sai's development. One idea was implementing some kind of stealth on Rek'Sai's burrowed form. After all, she's moving underground, so it wouldn't make a ton of sense if people could see her. The original notion was to give her stealth in her burrowed form that acted similarly to Evelyn's stealth, so you'd be able to see Rek'Sai if she was really close to you, but from far away, she'd be totally invisible. Unfortunately, it quickly became apparent that her kit would just be way too powerful if it had stealth, as well as all of the other features. A lot of Rek'Sai's kit was in flux during development, so it really was a case of deciding just which parts to keep and which parts to let go. Another example of an abandoned mechanic was on Rek'Sai's burrowed Q, which was originally a pass-through dash, a little bit similar to Fizz's Q. Riot's decision to remove this mechanic was based on her existing mobility. Because she already had her tunnels, she really just had all the in-combat mobility that she would ever need as a diver-style champion, and giving her any more would quickly make her problematic for sure. Another key difference between the current Rek'Sai and her development version was that her unburrow only acted as a form change that shifted between her ability sets, rather than having the knockup that it has today. So to gain the knockup benefit, this version of Rek'Sai previously would have to use her ultimate to change form, which in its original version acted as a combination between the knockup, a slow moving stealth, and some untargetability. Although Riot liked the knockup effect, they decided that the stealth and untargetability on Rek'Sai was a mistake, given that she could act as both a frontline tank or as a diving bruiser. So they shifted the knockup over to her Unburrow effect so that it would be accessible as a basic ability, and instead started working on completely different ideas for her ultimate that didn't cause her to transform or do anything like that, and overall with the goal of making something that just wasn't quite as broken. Next up, we've got some of Kledd's abilities from a post-Riot meddler made on a dev blog about champion prototypes. Around the time that Riot made the whole Gnar riding Hecarim placeholder model back in the day, Kledd's gameplay was still undergoing a lot of changes. His passive and his E were both pretty much finished at this point in the development, but his other skills were quite different. For example, his Q was more similar to his W, as it provided a flurry of melee hits, and his W was a ranged area of effect ability that provided some hard crowd control. Riot decided that this was not an ideal fit for what they had in mind with his gameplay, which is probably what pushed them towards putting crowd control on his Q instead. His ultimate at this point was actually just Riven's ultimate. It was a copy and paste of Riven's Blade of the Exile in Wind/Slash ability. And this one's particularly interesting because it wasn't on his kit because it was a good fit and they wanted to test it, but it was there because they really just needed to test all of his other abilities and he kind of just needed an ultimate so that he could function during playtests. This is probably a common issue for Riot's development. You might have a really good idea about what to do with the character's basic abilities, but it might not be clear just how they might actually interact in-game, as well as what kind of ultimate should be added, and you can't just test them with only the basic abilities because it's just incomplete and they drop off super hard after level 6 due to not having an ultimate, so it's logical to just give characters a simple and effective and useful ultimate to ensure that they can scale and get some decent testing data on the other abilities. Now we've got some Wukong concepts next on the list, and I'm particularly excited about these because it actually took me a really long time to find these. And the reason why it took so long to find these is because they were actually shared by Riot Zilius in a slideshow presentation that was given as a panel strictly to developers and was actually never intended to be released to the public. You could actually find the link to that slideshow directly in the description if you want to check it out a little bit more thoroughly. Either way, it shows that originally they actually wanted to give Wukong a persistent clone that would copy everything Wukong originally did in the game, including attacks and damage. So this was before Wukong had the kit we are familiar with today, and apparently it was extremely difficult to play with, which caused a lot of issues for Riot's design philosophy for the game. Having a champion that is essentially unplayable for everyone, that isn't just a total expert, doesn't exactly sit well with Riot, so the persistent clone was removed in favor of having a temporary one that could only be used as a distraction. Now this is actually a really good example of the difference between Riot and Valve when it comes to their MOBA design. Valve are pretty happy to release really difficult champions that push players to practice really hard and become really proficient with them to play them in competitive, but Riot never really wants champions to have such a significant barrier to entry. They'd prefer champions to just be difficult to master, but easy to kind of get the basics for. It definitely helps League stay on top when it comes to reaching newer audiences, but it has left a few people feeling disappointed with the number of extremely challenging mechanical champions in the game compared to Dota 2. Now our next ability is actually really exciting because for once in one of these videos we've actually got some scrapped abilities with concept art and actual gameplay footage of the ability itself. So our next set of abilities comes from Aurelia's rework and were shared by Riot Lone Wingy. The first ability was dreamt up during the exploratory phase of her development, where Riot were clearly trying to come up with new ways to justify her adeptness with blades. This version actually had her wielding 6 swords with 1 held in each arm. Yep, you heard that right, she actually had 6 arms at the time. This was an actual concept for her rework for a brief time. Another ability from Aurelia's redesign was also an ultimate ability that would allow her to fire a wave of blades for a few seconds. They didn't follow her, they would just flow out in the directions she chose and from the spot she casted it from. The blade stream would knock enemies back and damage them, but Riot felt that despite it being really cool to use, it played more like a strong support ability rather than the ideal ultimate for Aurelia. Another ultimate tested for her was a dash and knock-up combo that seemed to also include some invincibility frames. There wasn't any info from Riot about why this one was removed, but being crazy overpowered probably was one of them. We know that they wanted to keep Aurelia being super mobile for a fighter, but a hard to avoid dash combined with damage and hard crowd control is definitely pushing it. Now our last ability for Aurelia for today was an older version of her W that actually eventually became her ultimate. It sent out a bunch of blades that damaged all targets they passed through and then ended with a big wall, but Riot felt like it was pushing Aurelia into a little bit too difficult to play territory with it on her kit as a basic ability, but they did like the ability, so instead they decided to keep it on her kit as an ultimate. Now, if you've been keeping up with this channel, you might remember that a while ago we made a video talking about a cancel champion called the Ink Mage, or Paintbrush Mage. Riot Xenon recently gave some new information about the specifics of this champion design, and apparently they had one version that would let you paint glyphs on the map that would have different effects based on which one you painted. There was also a version of the gameplay of this character that went down actually really badly that allowed you to draw intricate shapes to damage and both slow enemies. And when you were in base, you could store certain patterns so that later in teamfights or in lane, players could use them quickly and consistently. Now the reason it did so badly was because you only ever really knew which shape you needed once you're actually fighting in the actual fight itself, and the most effective pattern was usually just a straight line or whatever the easiest one to draw was, like we demonstrated in our previous Ink Mage video. Now our next ability that we're taking a look at today is for Talia, and apparently in her development she could actually flat out destroy terrain. You would select a particular wall or terrain block and then just straight up destroy it, and the map would stay modified for actually quite a long time, for a few minutes or so. Unfortunately, despite being really cool, the rest of her kit is all about using bottlenecks to filter enemies into your line of fire, so destroying parts of the map really was counterproductive on her gameplay. Still, this means we could see something similar on a future champion, and it's a type of ability that Riot have actually talked about quite a long time, and in the previous years they didn't really explore it that much because at the time they didn't have the technology to actually make an ability like this work, but they obviously do have that tech now, so it's something that I would perhaps like to see or could anticipate seeing on a champion in the future for sure, or perhaps a rework. Now next up today, we've got an ability that was originally designed for Karma's 2013 rework way back in the day, which was actually the first significant rework ever for League of Legends, and this ability comes from Riot Skarzard, or I guess he's not with Riot anymore, but he was at the time of making this comment. And it came in response to a question from fellow YouTuber Shakarez, who commented on Skarzard's AMA that he enjoyed the rework simply because the mantra W heal made tank Karma viable. Skarzard mentioned that originally the empowered version of her W would give her a multi-tether, with the idea that using mantra would ascend or unlock her abilities. So for example, her fireball becomes a bigger fireball, or her single shield becomes a team-wide pentashield. Unfortunately, it seemed really difficult to survive after landing multiple tethers with one ability. Sure, everyone on the enemy team might be rooted, but they just use their abilities to kill you. So instead of sticking with that concept, Skarzard ended up giving her a different and super powerful effect on the ability instead. One cool little Easter egg featuring this scrapped concept is that her mantra empowered W still has multiple tethers in the ability icon. But based on the way this ability is described, it seems very comparable to that of Morgana's ultimate, so it definitely makes sense why this wasn't actually kept in Karma's gameplay. Either way, that's going to be it for all the abilities. Thank you so much for watching the video.